My name is Leah Best. I came into the Provincial Records Cluster in September of 2017 after Catherine Bridge retired. My knowledge of the work over the 4 years of this cluster is relatively limited, which is why Gord is going to be presenting his curatorial dream today. I do want to say the Provincial Records Cluster did look at government records. They looked at several categories of records, which included the BC Search Record Database, government records, manuscript records, and audio interviews. The archival staff at the Royal BC Museum contributed this past summer alone over 500 hours in support of the research by the RAs in the space. And now I just wanted to point out here on the wall as well, one of the outputs of this cluster was collaborating with Jordan's public history grad students to produce this exhibition. There's Gord in the photo right there, on the Landscapes of Injustice project in the archives. Gord.
Thank you, Leah. Hello, everybody. Over the past 2 summers, Provincial Records Cluster reviewed over 3,000 files held at the BC Archives, with the majority of these records previously restricted until our recent research agreement with the Royal BC Museum. We worked with the guiding question of what role did the provincial government play in the dispossession of Japanese Canadian property? Based on the records we searched, the answer appears to be very little. BC was much more involved in the forced removal of Japanese Canadians from the coast than the dispossession of property, which was largely a federal concern. It would be incorrect, however, to say that the province had no role in the dispossession. For example, an organization known as the Provincial Civilian Protection Committee, dedicated to preparing BC for a possible coastal invasion, requested the use of seized automobiles and fishing vessels. Yet, while the province took no part in the actual sale of JC property, within the wide range of materials we reviewed, we can see ripples of the effects of dispossession. For example, mental health records reveal how the loss of property and forced removal caused great violence to both the material and the mental lives of JC families. And probate records show the callousness of bureaucracy as families deferred to the custodian of enemy property to settle the estate of loved ones. While these records show us the various impacts of dispossession, the notable absence of provincial government participation in the sale of property directs us to ask further questions. What do these ripples of dispossession reveal about the relationships between citizens and the state in British Columbian history? When these disparate records are connected together, what do they tell us about how the province responded to these concerns of both Japanese Canadians and the general public? Provincial records reveals that the province and its white voting membership utilized wartime rhetoric to justify a desire for JC property and the entrenchment of a white man's province. Evidence of this desire can be seen in letters written by white citizens to the province requesting purchase of fishing vessels confiscated from Japanese Canadians. These letters provide material for Provincial Records' curatorial dream. This dream is a virtual museum exhibit currently titled To Be Announced. We propose a virtual museum exhibit along the lines of a current project in development by the Nikkei National Museum based on Japanese Canadian protest letters to the federal government. Because letters are text-based and aesthetically difficult to display in traditional museums, a website and database would be more appropriate. We have found about 43 of these letters, and I believe more can be found in the LAC collection. This is a manageable number of documents that can be transcribed to provide machine-readable database with proper metadata. While these letters center the exhibit, mapping and describing the histories of a few vessels and responses from Japanese Canadian fishers can provide added context and history of this dispossession and make the site more interactive. What we found surprising about the letters is that a good portion of them were written by people who had absolutely no experience in coastal fishing. Many letter writers were also under the impression that the provincial government was anxious to have white fishermen come and make use of the vessels. To quote the Assistant Commissioner of Provincial Fisheries, George Alexander, these people had been grossly misinformed. Many of the vessels wound up in military service or were sold to canneries, and the quick dispersal of the fleet meant that the most common reply to these inquiries was either to ask the federally mandated Japanese Fishing Vessel Disposal Committee or that all the boats were already gone. I'll now read a few brief excerpts from these letters to offer a sense of their flavor. On January 18, 1942, John Patterson of Pioneer Mine, BC, wrote, "When the matter of putting the seized Japanese fishing fleet to work is finally settled, will you please let me know so that two of us who are ambitious to go fishing might secure one or two of these boats?" And William Fishley of Powell River wrote, "There are a lot of rumors that the Jap fish boats are going to be sold. I'd like to get one if this is true." Of note, Mr. Fishley made sure that the department knew that he was English. Finally, E. Tinkus of Calgary asked, "Will you please send me information about the Japanese fishing boats that the government has taken hold of?" George Alexander's reply to Mr. Tinkus was standard. The federal government set up a special committee to deal with the disposition of fishing vessels owned by Japanese which were immobilized by the Department of National Defense. I would recommend that you communicate with the above named for any information in connection with the acquisition of one of these vessels. These letters tell an important part of the story of dispossession. They offer evidence of the public demand for the property taken from Japanese Canadians. While it's been commonly acknowledged that both governments desired these vessels to continue fishing to support the war effort, these letters reveal that the appetite for these vessels also came from average citizens who saw an opportunity to get fishing boats at fire sale prices. We believe these letters contribute significantly to discussions on bystanders and the role they played in the dispossession. While it is easy to vilify the state, it is harder to address the role an average Canadian played in the story. This is not to say the letter writer should be vilified, but this collection is an opportunity to show the tacit support of dispossession from not only Canadian but American citizens as well. They also prompt us to ask questions about who were these letter writers. What spurred their desire to leave their current situations and take up a dangerous and hard profession such as marine fishing? Is there some kind of logic to their assumption that they could simply buy a boat and join the industry? We expect visitors to the exhibition will feel a sense of discomfort as they discover that average Canadians played such an active role in the dispossession. Hopefully such experiences will elicit heartfelt reflections on the role of citizens in Canadian history and policymaking. Added to these letters, our cluster discovered records that reveal the fate of some of these vessels. Some were at the center of very colorful events. For example, the Izumi 3 was the scene of a grisly case of fratricide in 1949. And the SN, renamed Rio 2, and then Guess Who, became the subject of a complicated case of boat theft. The LOI Research Collective has also gathered a number of images of some of these vessels that have never been seen by the public, as they are either part of restricted record groups recently opened as the result of our cluster's effort, or never digitized until now. This offers new imagery beyond the standard stock images typically used from archives. We envision a virtual museum that offers these letters and some boat histories in a single frame to show how government and the general public found a use for property taken from Japanese Canadians. Transcriptions, maps, and images can all be presented in one website dedicated to the dispossession of Japanese Canadian-owned fishing vessels. Thank you.